Hello, my name is Shirley Lloyd. I'm a retired teacher from the Brentwood Public Schools, teacher of speech and hearing handicapped and second grade. My name Shirley was given to me back in 1935 when I was born by my mom and dad, I guess. I know I was named after Shirley Temple, who was a childhood movie star in those years, and I was born during the Depression. So I had many stories told to me over the years about the Depression, so I'm very familiar with things that happened even though I was a baby. I had later learned the history of the Depression. My middle name, I think I was named, my middle name is Ann. I was named after an aunt on my mother's side, I believe. And of course, my maiden name was Hunter, but over the years I had to drop Hunter, and I just used the middle initial H because I married a person by the name of Joel Walker, so I had his name, Walker, and then my second marriage I had married Robert Lloyd, so I have Shirley Walker Lloyd, and the Hunter name's gotten lost in the shuffle, but that was my maiden name, Hunter.
Did you ever have a nickname, Shirley?
Cheryl.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's part of my email address now.
Yes.
So.
Tell me about, mention the Depression. Tell me about memories that you had.
Well, we were very, very poor. We lived in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, which was a coal town. Actually, one of my creative writing classes, I wrote a story about Carbondale, Pennsylvania, and the memories that I have of it, which were very bleak. Even though I was only a little girl, I still remember certain aspects of it. Like we didn't have dryers in those days. We had washing machines, or old-fashioned washing machines, or old-fashioned washboards that I can still see my mom washing the clothes on the washboard, which today's kids probably don't know what that is. But anyway, in the tub, and hanging the clothes out. But they never looked really white, like the sheets, because of the coal dust in the area. They looked gray. And those are some of my memories from Carbondale, because it was well named because they had mine fires under the ground. And everybody that lived in Carbondale had to leave their back doors open because the inspectors had to come in the middle of the night with their little gadgets that they checked the degree of carbon monoxide in the homes. And that's how we lived in those days. We didn't think anything of it. And I remember that we always lived in a cold water flat. And we had heat with like a potbelly stove and that type of thing. And I tell stories to my own children. They look at me, as if I'm from the dark ages, but that's how it was. We were just very poor. My dad stood in bread lines, and they took any job they could get. And then the government tried to help people by forming the WPA, the work program. My dad worked in that, and just any kind of work to survive.
Yes.
There was no welfare program in those days. No. And everybody did what they had to do. My mom took in sewing. She used to make our clothes. I remember out of feed sacks that you would get from the local store that had flour in them and different kinds of dry goods. And that's what our clothes were made out of. And of course, it would look new by the time my mom got through it. It looked like a dress or something, it looked very, very nice, but that's what we used to wear, plus hand-me-downs.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember times when you were hungry, when you went to bed hungry?
Well, I remember Mom trying to spread out a meal and make it go further, and almost like the biblical story of the loaves and the fishes, and so that there would be enough for everyone. Somehow they managed to scrape together enough. Did
your dad work in the mines, or was he?
No, but I had cousins, people that I knew that worked in the mines, and who had some physical problems as a result of the mines.
Yeah. Tell us about your mom and dad.
Well, my mom and dad were married very, very young. My mom was an orphan. She was 17, and my father was from a big family. He was 19 at the time they were married. So in those days, they barely could finish high school. If they finished high school, it was very surprising because children were taught to work in those days. My mom was not allowed to finish. By 8th grade, women especially, were sent out to work as maids and housekeepers and things of that nature, and especially if they were orphans and they were farmed out to foster homes. She was a foster child. And in those days, sounds like cider house rules. They would come to get an orphan from an orphanage, and they would use them as work slaves. And as I was telling some of my kids one time, one of my classes, it was before the child labor laws, but when Mom and Dad grew up. I mean, kids were working 10, 11 years of age, and I think that they thought nothing of it. They've always worked their whole life. They really didn't have a childhood.
That's right.
So,
and long hours as well.
Oh, long hours, sure. My dad would take 2 or 3 jobs, whatever he had to do to put bread on the table.
Yes. Yeah. What was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. It's Welsh.
Mm-hmm. And what was your father's background?
His family, Hunter was last name, Scottish-Irish. A family of 12, 13, I think. Well, one passed away at birth, so there's actually 12. He was the eldest. So the burden of a lot of the work and helping support his family, his mom and dad, his father worked for the railroad on the, I think the B&O Railroad up there in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. But my dad just did everything he could do to earn a living. And he had various jobs, like a short order cook, for example. I remember... what did he finally do? Finally, in his later years, he was trained as an oil burner serviceman when we moved to New Jersey. I think that's what he did. But most people had to move away from Pennsylvania in the early 40s because of the Depression. The work was in different, more industrialized states. So we moved when I was 5 or 6 years of age to New Jersey so that my dad could find a decent paying job to support his family.
Okay. Did you know your grandparents?
Yes. My mother, my grandmother on my father's side, Ethel Carell Hunter, and my grandfather, as I say, I remember the railroad hat he used to wear. It looked like an engineer's hat, but he worked the gates. But he wore the crossing gates. The crossing gates, right. Mm-hmm. And I remember we used to take his lunch to him in a lunchbox there down by the railroad tracks. I was always fascinated as a kid with the railroads and things because that's what I was exposed to. Sure. And now they have a museum up there in this town, Honesdale, Pennsylvania, where they have one of the first engines that crossed the United States, and it's like a historical landmark area.
And you knew your father's parents as well, right?
Those were my father's parents. I never knew my mother's parents because my mother's...
Oh, that was your father's parents?
Yes, those were my father's parents. My mother's parents both died when she was 2 years of age.
Oh, that's right.
They had some kind of plague or a flu epidemic or something in those days.
1919 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was put in an orphanage with one of her brothers, and the other younger brothers were adopted.
What about now? What's your family circumstance now, Shirley?
Well, now both my parents are deceased. And I have 3 sisters who live in New Jersey. I have nobody that's related to me living on Long Island except my own son and his wife and my grandchildren.
Okay. They're on Long Island?
They're on Long Island. But
Do you get much of a chance to visit?
Oh, absolutely. They're in Bright Waters.
Oh, good.
And I'm in West Islip, so I'm grandma.
And with the holidays coming up, I'm sure there'll be many.
I'm active grandma.
I'll say you are, yes.
Using all my teaching skills.
Tell me about the grandkids. Tell me about the kids and the grandkids.
Well, my son, Jim, who works in New York City down near Wall Street, and whose company was certainly involved right near the Trade Center, and there's a long story there with where he was located at the time. But anyway, his company's still in business. Thank heavens, ILX Corporation. And he is the father of my only 2 grandchildren, which happens to be 2 boys. My first grandchild is named Ian James Walker, and my second one was just born in February of this past year. He's 9 months old. His name is Kyle. My daughter, who's a teacher in Indianapolis, South Bay High School down in, is expecting her first child the end of January 2003, actually February 1st, 2003.
So you must have all felt very fortunate excuse me, that your son was not caught up in the events.
He was on a subway heading towards the World Trade Center. He was 3 blocks away at the time. And for some, I'm sure they had gotten a word. The authorities turned the subway around and they didn't tell the passengers. So he said, why are we turning around? He couldn't understand. They said, we're taking everybody back to Penn Station. They took everybody back to Penn Station. He gets out of the subway, which he's taken every day of his life for several years now. There's nobody in Penn Station. It's evacuated. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know. He's out of touch. Now, you're in a subway. You're not.
Yes.
Nobody could reach him by cell phone or anything. He doesn't know what's happening. So he sees nobody at Penn Station. He said, oh, what's going on here? I don't know. So then he got so confused with that. He went out the wrong entrance. I think he said he was heading towards the Jersey side, and he heard somebody had a boom box on or a loud radio, and he heard. That's how we found out. Oh, Lord. And they said that nothing was running and nothing was working, and that this terrible disaster was occurring and everything. And he first thought was, how can he knew he couldn't get to work because he worked just several blocks from he knew he couldn't get there because the subways weren't running in that direction anymore. He knew he had to get home, so he didn't know how to. He had to. He's smart enough. He went to a bookstore, I think, and got a map and figured out a way to get himself. And he walked over to the east. He realized he was on the wrong side of Manhattan. He was heading towards New Jersey. So I don't want to go to New Jersey. Yes. I want to go to Long Island. So he got himself on the east side. And he found out. I think he got Hunters Point. Got to Hunters Point and took a ferry, I think. I think that's what he did, Hunters Point. Anyway, it was a route he had never taken before. Yes. And he figured out how to get home. And then I got a call a few hours. All this is several hours now without knowing where he is. I got a call from my daughter-in-law that he was at Hunters Point and he was going to take a ferry to, I think, the northern part of Long Island there, wherever the ferry goes, and then take a train. I think it was Glen Cove, wherever that ferry lands. Yes. And that he would be home in a few hours. So. He got home, I think. He started at 9:30 in the morning. I got home like 6 o'clock that night, I think, or 7 o'clock that night. All day on trains. And
a day that none of us will ever forget.
Right. Yeah. But the fact that he was so close was...
Yeah, and the fact that he was okay at the end.
Right. It's like a miracle, really.
Really. Among your adult influences growing up, Shirley, who were the most important ones besides your mother and father?
Oh, I guess my teachers, I would have to say.
Do you remember any of them by name?
Oh, yeah. I remember my fourth grade teacher. I think her name was, I want to say, it starts with an M. And I'm very big on names now, John.
Well,
I want to say something like McAfee or something. It was an Irish name anyway, but she was a very attractive woman, a very strong influence, a very good teacher.
Who was the influence that directed you toward the career that you eventually followed?
Well, you see, in my day, they didn't have such a thing as speech language pathologist or speech therapist. That was a new field that I didn't know anything about until I got into college. So. But the act of teaching itself, and my teachers were very strong influence of my fifth grade teacher, my sixth grade teacher. They all had they all encouraged me to do well academically, and and in other ways too. They encouraged me because I used to be very shy, believe it or not, and they used to help me personality-wise. And kids would make fun of me, like they do a lot of times because I was very tall for my age. Yes. And I was like, with the long neck, they used to call me giraffe neck and all that sort of thing. Like you say, nicknames, but kids always made fun of kids. Yes. Then it wasn't fashionable to wear glasses in those days. I had glasses since I'm 6 years old, so they called me Four Eyes, that kind of thing. But the teachers always encouraged me not to be so depressed or not to be so quiet or whatever. So I think they were good.
Did you have responsibilities in your own home, like chores that you were responsible for doing?
Oh, yes. I came from the work ethic generation. We all had chores before we could do anything. Go to a football game on Saturday, you had to do your chores, clean the bathroom, whatever your assignment was. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, we all had to clean, and we were very well trained with housekeeping chores.
Was your first paying job down in Pennsylvania, or did it not?
No, because I moved to New Jersey right after the Depression. When I was only like 6 years old, I moved to New Jersey.
Where in New Jersey did you move to?
Oh, Lyndhurst near.
Do you remember the first paying job you ever had?
Yes, I worked in a movie theater, as a cashier. And also doubled as a candy girl behind the candy stand and did everything. You know, in those days, the employers always got 2 for 1. So I was always very impressed with theater and movies and things. I used to see all these movies for free. I guess I lived in a fantasy world in those days, but they were free. So I like to see the movies I liked. I could see 3 or 4 times if I wanted to.
Was there a favorite holiday growing up, a family holiday?
I guess Christmas. I would have to say Christmas.
Yeah. Everybody gathered where?
Well, we had 4. There were 4 daughters, so usually they gathered at my parents' home.
Okay.
And sometime we'd go up to Pennsylvania sometime, but I think that would be like the day after Christmas or whatever, to see my other grandparents.
Over the years, has your pattern changed? Are you a morning person or a night person today? And has it changed?
I'm a morning person now.
Mm-hmm.
It has changed, yes, to answer the question. Yes, I used to, certainly when I was in college, I was a night person.
Okay.
Absolutely. It was all night cramming and so forth. I don't know how I used to stay up those, but now I have to get up early.
Do you have a favorite season, Shirley?
Fall. I would say fall, maybe because I was born in September, but it's just beautiful, I think.
Yes.
Fall.
So many of our colleagues moving away from the 4 seasons as they go south.
They come back too.
Yes. Let's see. How about this question? Did you have, if I say the word toys, what comes to mind?
That's funny, toy trains.
Yes.
Now, because we used to have a set of trains under the tree. And I guess I'm very conscious of it now because my grandson's involved with that now.
Sure.
And
Okay.
I just bought him some wooden tracks. So it just came to mind.
Yeah. What undergraduate schools did you attend when you got to that level, when you finished your... Well, talk us through your educational experience.
Well, I'm a graduate of Lyndhurst High School,
Mm-hmm.
which I just went back to a class reunion not too long ago, which was 50 years. It was very interesting. But the town that I grew up in now is, there's a whole sports arena there. Used to be Secaucus area, pig farms, meadowlands. And now they had a giant stadium there and all this, and we could hardly find a way back to Lyndhurst because we didn't recognize, and we had not been in that area in so long. And it was near Rutherford, but anyway, I was accepted to 2 schools, Montclair State Teachers College at the time, which is now a university, and I think it was Fairleigh Dickinson, and I opted because I was very interested, a member of the Future Teachers of America Club in those years in the high school. So I always had...
you knew early on.
I always had in my back of my mind that I wanted to be a teacher, and as I say, so many teachers were influential, and the guidance counselor in the high school also said it seemed that most of my leanings were towards teaching. And but I never had teachers in my family before. I never even had college graduates in my family before.
So you're the first.
So I'm the first, yeah. I'm the first person in my whole family to have a college degree.
Well, you could identify with a lot of the students you had in Brentwood then, in that respect.
Absolutely. And I have to say that my mom, because she was denied an education, and both my mom and my dad, because my dad never completed high school, at least, but he had 3 years. He was a very smart man. My mom never even got to high school. They encouraged their daughters to be educated and to go on and make something of themselves. So I have to give them credit.
And how far did you go with your formal education?
I went to graduate school. Of course, I did a lot of graduate work when I got out here to Brentwood. I did at Delphi. So I have.
Where did you complete your undergraduate work?
In Montclair State Teachers College. I got my BA in speech and English.
Speaking of Brentwood, when did you get here?
1961.
And what brought you to Brentwood?
My husband's business actually was transferred out here to Long Island from New Jersey. Copiague had a business in Copiague at the time. And back then, the island was certainly different.
Yes.
And I didn't really know my way around the island very much, but I knew I would have to get a teaching job out here. So I was at a conference in New York City where they were advertising on one of their employment boards It was a conference for speech and hearing teachers at that time for the whole state of New York and New Jersey. They combined, I think it was East Coast. And there were people interviewing for jobs out on Long Island. And I'd never heard of Brentwood. But I thought, let me talk to these people that are hiring for Brentwood Public Schools. Maybe it's not too far from West Islip. I didn't know. I looked on the map. So I met a man by the name of R.O.B.S at this, I think it was a Statler Hotel in New York City, who was interviewing for Brentwood. And gave me a application to fill out and all this, and told me to report there for an interview at such and such a time with himself and someone by the name of Dr. Smith. And it took me a while to figure out where Brentwood was, and I finally, so I went there for the interview. And
so that would have been Jack Smith then?
Jack Smith, right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And then they said, sit down, have a cup of coffee. And I was like very formal looking, because that's what I thought you're supposed to do for interviews. I had my white gloves on. This is what we learned in college, you know, to prepare yourself formally for an interview and have your, you know, everything just so in the white gloves and the hat, the whole thing. I'll never forget it.
Do you remember any of the questions that they were asking?
Well, take your gloves off first. Don't you want to take your gloves? You know, I'm just kidding. Yes, they asked me my background, like you're doing, my experience. At that time, I had been teaching in Clifton, New Jersey for 3 years, and what brought me to Long Island, and, you know, because my husband's being transferred out here and so forth. My college experience and, you know, what ages of children that I worked with in Clifton, mostly background questions, based on my professional experience.
So what was your first impression then?
Well, they were so informal.
Oh.
I was really very, very impressed. Everybody was on a first name basis, and I was, you know, referring to the Mr. This and Dr. You know, and I was very, very, very impressed with the informality.
And so your first, when you received notification that you had been hired, is there a story there, or is that just something that...
No, I was elated. I was very happy because we just bought a house, and, you know, I was so happy that I didn't have to go interview a lot of other places.
Where were you assigned, first job?
Oh, my first, well, speech teachers traveled a lot in those days. So I think I had 3 or 4 schools. I think the first one was Village School, which is now the administration building, as you know. Village School, Southwest was one of my first teaching assignments. There were only like 6 elementary schools then, I think. That was the other one, Southeast. I was just like going all over the...
Sure. I'll bet you remember how much you made that first year, too.
Well, I know when I was making Clifton, New Jersey, when I started, I made $4,000 a year.
Before taxes, right?
Right. And... Then when I moved to Brentwood, I got a raise. I made $6,000 a year.
Yes.
People can't identify with that today, I'm sure.
Shirley, it was another world. I mean, it's a very different world from the world we live in today. So you had experience then at all grade levels, or was this...
Well, in those days, I was certified to teach speech and hearing from K through 12, and I have permanent teaching certification for elementary grades. In those days, it said K through 6, I believe, but there was not a separate kindergarten certification then.
Who did you work with? Who were some of the people that you worked with in the beginning?
Oh, boy. Well, when I first started, like I said, Village School, Joe Carson was my first principal that I recall very well, and his secretary was Candy. I remember Candy very well. And Dr. Weaver's right. Ruth Weaver was the school nurse. And I remember Dr. Weaver taught adult ed in those days, I think, at the high school. But anyway.
You're talking about Fred Weaver? Who became
Fred Weaver,
yes,
right.
Okay, all right.
But anyway, my recall about some of the teachers, for some reason, they stand out in my mind from Village School because they went on to become administrators. That's why they're in my mind. One special ed teacher that I used to go into class and get his students out because he had what they call an ED, emotionally disturbed class, was Howie Brodsky. He was the teacher in that class, and I really remember very well the students that he had and how effective he was with their discipline.
Yes.
And I think Bruce Romboli, as I recall, was a 5th grade teacher in that school at the time, and Austin Harney. Austin Harney was a teacher. See, and all these colleagues of mine turned out to go on, and I stayed. I stayed in my role as a speech teacher or the elementary, but they all went on. I remember going to the classrooms to get the children and knowing them as colleagues, as I say. So we go back a long time, some of the administrators and myself.
You must have enjoyed what you did, though. You must have enjoyed.
Oh, I enjoyed my working with the children. Yes, I really. Yes, I just, there were problems, but
Is
there were
anything
rewards.
that you would like to have done or accomplished that you weren't able to see in your tenure?
You mean in Brentwood in particular?
Working with the kids in
Well,
your field?
I would very often work with children like from very poor families and backgrounds, and we would just have them approved for special services to have speech a certain number of days or a certain number of hours on very severe cases, many handicapped children. Severe cleft palate case that I had. I worked very hard, and that was at village school. I remember the child had an open cleft. Anyway, we went to all this trouble, and I even went to the doctor with it because the family had no. In those days, we got permission, and Red Cross drove us. We had all kinds of home visits and things of that nature. I worked very closely with the school nurse, and we bent over backwards. I took the interpreter, who was Joe Carson's secretary, to the house with me. I'll never forget. It was a house in the basement in back of a store on Fifth Avenue. And it's just a terrible scene. But anyway, to make a long story short.
Terrible scene in terms of.
In the home, the living environment.
The living environment.
Flies all over. Several children on mattresses.
You have seen an awful lot, haven't you?
I have seen how people lived in Brentwood.
We used to encourage new teachers in the district to go
to the homes.
To
we did. The school nurse and I used to go.
They would know their blueberries.
We knew where these children were coming from. We knew the environment, and many times we couldn't speak the language. We would take interpreters with us. I made more than one home visit to get these children medical help, and because I felt that was part of my job.
Yes.
There's a child with an open cleft palate. You can't correct that. You have to have surgery. And they didn't understand. Either they didn't have it in the country that they came from, whether it was Puerto Rico or El Salvador or wherever they came, or they didn't have medical coverage or whatever. And so we arranged through the school district to get all these connections through a doctor who donated his services and everything else. And they moved in the middle of the night.
Oh, my goodness.
We spent hours, days on this case.
Oh.
And so when you ask the question, I would have liked to have seen this boy.
Closure with that.
Yes, closure. I never knew what happened to this boy because of rent problems or whatever. I don't know. They moved in the middle. Nobody knows where they went. And every time you just get started working with a child or a family, they would move.
Shirley, your response prompts this question. You had certainly a job description, but you also had your own purpose for coming to work every day.
Absolutely.
What was your purpose? Why did you do what you did?
I wanted to help the children.
That's it. Simple as that. Okay. Were you ever actively involved in the professional organizations that like BTA?
Oh yes,
or anything?
Oh yes. I was very actively involved with BTA for many years, and they were very actively involved with me.
Is that right? Yes.
Because I was one of the famous 14 teachers back in the 70s.
Talk about that. Tell us about that.
Well, there were those days. The teachers' union had a long, hard struggle. They had started working for teachers' rights even before I came along, I'm sure. But in those days, it was a struggle to maintain jobs and have a decent class size and all kinds of things that the teachers' contracts were negotiating for. And of course, they had periods where they felt because of the influx of all the bilingual children, they weren't even bilingual, they were monolingual at the time, they needed teachers who could speak Spanish. So what they did one year back in, I guess it was 75, if I remember correctly, 74, 75, they laid off other teachers who had seniority and who had 10 years experience like myself, and they kept on the bilingual teachers who had 1 year of experience because they could speak Spanish. So we talked to our union delegates, and they said that they couldn't do that, that's not right. So we got together and we had a court case about it because, in my case, because I was I had a dual certification, they said that I was not certified on an elementary level because I was also a speech teacher, or I had worked in the speech and hearing department for so long, and that my tenure wasn't all in the same area. So they tried to say that I was like similar to a 3-year teacher instead of a 10-year teacher. And the union took issue. I went to the union in fact, I have copies of letters that I wrote to Jack Zuckerman, and we asked the union lawyer to represent us, Alan Oshram, in those days. I read not too long ago, he's a judge or something someplace in the Supreme Court, I think now. But anyway, he was our lawyer, and I still remember meeting with him and signing all kinds of papers and everything, and we had 2 lawsuits going. We had one for the elementary teachers who were laid off, the famous 14 teachers, and then we had another one on reverse discrimination. So I was involved with both of those lawsuits.
And explain the reverse discrimination?
Well, the reverse discrimination was those teachers were kept on regardless of their expertise, only because they could speak Spanish.
I see, yes.
Not because they were excellent teachers or they were experienced teachers or whatever.
And how did all of that turn out then?
It turned out very well for those of us. I mean, it was very difficult, I must say, because the district got even by assigning us to various places where we had no certifications. Like, for example, I was assigned as long as the case was in court, they couldn't fire us. So we were given temporary assignments. Elementary teacher on special assignment, it was called. So I was assigned to R.O.B.S Senior High School, which was the only high school in those years.
Yes.
And I worked in the reading lab as a reading teacher, which I wasn't certified for, with George Cavuto as a one-on-one with the remedial reading teacher.
I see. Mm-hmm. But ultimately it was resolved.
Oh, it was resolved. So it went to the Supreme Court and the appellate court in Brooklyn, I believe.
And the 14 people stayed on staff.
Well, they reassigned everybody, as they say. Some of them, like that, are still active in the retired teachers group that we talked to, or they were assigned as ESL teachers. They were given different assignments, and I was put back in the classroom. Interestingly enough, after all of this, a few years later, after I was put back in the classroom, I was teaching 2nd grade at Pine Park, and they passed these new laws for the handicapped. I think it was Johnson, I think it was Johnson in the office, and they said, "Oh, we're out of compliance. We need speech teachers." They wanted to take me right out of the classroom and put me in the speech department again. I said, "Wait a minute. I don't want to lose what we fought for. I'm going to lose my tenure again," and all this. So I got on the phone and I talked to my president, Jack Zuckerman at the time. Jack and Dot Zuckerman were very helpful during those years.
I hear that in what you're saying.
They got to know me very well, and I got to know them. Sometimes I was on the phone with them at 10 o'clock at night.
Yes.
So I said, I'm not doing anything till I talk to my union people. Mm-hmm. So then I did. And they said that the court case was settled, and it didn't look like they could go back into court and appeal it. And so everything, if I wanted to do this, if I still remembered how to be a speech teacher, then. So they took me right out of the 2nd grade classroom in the middle of the term so that they would be in compliance with the new laws for the handicapped, because they had so many children in need of special speech services at that time.
Okay.
So I was back and forth, as I say. And at the end of that year, was it Harvey Brickman? One of the teachers, one of the principals came to me and said, "Well, it's a good thing you made that decision. I couldn't tell you then, but you were going to get laid off again anyway." And it said that my job was going to be abolished as an elementary teacher. I still have several letters, John.
Wow.
I just have a whole file of letters, actually, some signed by...
You had a guardian angel sitting
Right. It was just unbelievable. It's just how, I mean, Dr. Brieger, I have letters from Dr. Brieger, George Mann, G. Guy DiPietro. In fact, I have a funny one from Guy DiPietro that was written in 81. I think it said that he had a sense of humor, really. He was, through all these trials and tribulations, he still remained like a friend to the teachers, and you knew it really wasn't his fault, you see. So we would go and sit down and talk with him and have coffee or tea or whatever. And he wrote us a letter in 81, 82 that, I regret to inform you, oops, wrong letter. He had a really, oops, I know, I'm really glad, he said in this letter, that to welcome you back. And then he'd go, but however, for next year, he put down P.S., and he's just kidding. It was a very funny letter. I'll have to show it to you sometime.
That's great. That's a wonderful
I have
story.
such a collection of letters.
Yeah. What, as it turned out, was the date of your retirement ultimately?
Officially, it was July 1st, 1995.
Why? What happened? Why did you decide that was the time?
Well, it was already 32 and a half years. I was getting a little tired. Then the state came through with an offer I couldn't refuse.
Okay. That was it, the incentive, huh?
So it was an incentive. I thought, well, now why should I work 2 more years if I can take this incentive?
At that point, what was your assignment? What were you doing?
I was a speech teacher at Hemlock Park Elementary School at that time.
Since then, you have, as you said before, been a very active grandma.
Oh, yes.
And
well,
what are you doing these days?
Well, my first grandchild was born in 96. I also became, once you become a retired teacher, the word goes out to your churches and other organizations. I did help with the Project Hope the first 2 years that I retired. I worked at the Suburban Children's Center on Fifth Avenue. I was one of the tutors there. Then I got involved with my church. Well, I had been involved with my church missions group for a while, but that started growing and became missions and outreach, and I was the head of that committee for a long time, and ended up working, and I'm still working with homeless families and different groups on the island to help the underprivileged. So I'm still involved with children.
As I talk to our members, I am made aware more and more that we put new meaning to the word retirement. It's not what it used to be. You don't go fishing, you don't play golf.
No, I said that to myself. I had all these visions of taking golf lessons and doing, well, I do swim sometimes. I did join a spa finally. After I had a couple of health scares, I decided, they told me I was on the show. I do water aerobics, I do swim. Sometimes I ride a bike in the nice weather, but I really don't have a lot of leisure time. And then
you also belong to a writer, a creative writing.
Well, I did take courses. See, once you're a student your whole life and a teacher, you never stop learning, of course. So I signed up for all these classes. I was going to do things that were not necessarily pertaining to my academic field, but that things I always wanted to do, and I never had time to do. So I took creative writing classes, and I started writing like children's stories because I figured that was my expertise. But I never really published anything. I have files and files, and I never, I guess I'm a procrastinator. I just didn't get around to sending it to publishers and magazines and school publications and things like that. But I was inspired by one of our retired teachers' meetings from the twins when they presented their book and all. I thought, now maybe I can do something now with all my stories so I was inspired by Marie Popo's daughter.
Speaking of books, is there a book that influenced you greatly in your life? Can you think of a book that was a powerful book in your life?
Oh gosh, there's so many books. I've been reading my whole life. I've spent so many years in the library as a kid. In fact, when I spoke at my class reunion, I said that was my solace. That was to get away from problems in the family or whatever.
Yes.
I spent many hours in the public library with my nose in a book. In fact, my mom used to complain, you don't want to do your chores. You want to, You want to sit there with your nose in the book, but of course we didn't have TV in those days. So, I guess, I don't know, let's see. This is like a series of books. I'm trying to think. There's so many of them.
Oh, the series of books you mean?
Right, but about like Little Women, I guess. Little Women.
Oh, yes.
That's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking, I was going to say like that movie about the prairie, but the TV, it's the Little House on the Prairie. It's a similar series of people with hardships, overcoming hardships.
Well, it's not unlike the Bobbsey Twins and other series.
Right.
That were
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think
era.
of.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
But so you go back a long way, John.
Oh yes, don't we all?
Yeah. But those were the kind of books.
Yes.
And I remember The Yearling.
Yes.
Those types of books.
Is there anything, looking back over your life, and this is perhaps a tough question, but anything that you would have done differently? Anything that you regret doing, Shirley, or that you took this fork in the road, whereas you maybe think that?
Well, I certainly regret marrying my first husband. So that was. He was very charming, but when things were going bad in Brentwood in 75, 76, he decided he's going to quit his job and leave us. So, I think that was a big mistake on my part.
Yes, I opened myself to that answer.
Yes.
It's quite obviously.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I was a single parent for 8 years, and in fact, I'll never forget. Ernesto called me up after I was laid off, and my husband left us around the same time. He said I was hit with a double-barrel shotgun.
Oh. Is there anything in the way of advice that, if this were to be watched by people who have replaced us in the classroom and in the capacity that you filled for so many years, is there any advice that you, based on your experience, might be able to offer them? The younger teachers, the younger therapists that are working with kids?
Well, I think that I would advise them, first of all, to appreciate their union, what the union can do for them, because it certainly was a big influence in my life. It was a big, in fact, I spoke at Jack Zuckerman's retirement dinner, and I said, not only I thank you, but my children thank you for saving our jobs. And those of us who were the sole breadwinners in those days, I mean, people today don't know what struggles we have. We even walked the picket line at one time.
I remember.
Trying to, because of the job cuts.
Yes.
We even had a strike vote at one time, so I don't think they've had that in years, as far as I know. But I would say that to the young teachers, is appreciate what your union can do for you, and don't be afraid to speak up. It's so hard. I don't know young teachers today. I know old teachers and, people like myself who've been in the business for so many years. And I'm sure there's many good young teachers out there today, but I just really don't know them that well. But I just would say, don't give up.
Okay, so what you're saying, or what I hear you saying, is that you're hesitant to give advice to somebody who you don't know, because you don't know where the advice.
Well, it's all changed, John.
So
everything
yes.
has changed. I visited recently at the R.O.B.S Schools. I attended a kindergarten screening for my grandson. Then I was recently invited back to his classroom for a Thanksgiving festival. And the things that they're learning in kindergarten today. I did a lot of work with kindergarten. I used to screen kindergarten kids all the time and go into classrooms and work with them, especially the ones who were too shy, too reluctant to come to the speech room. I would work with them right in the back of the classroom. So I spent many, many hours in kindergartens. And I said to this this kindergarten teacher in Bayshore, you are teaching in kindergarten what I taught in first and second grade years ago. It's amazing. Now we have our reading readiness skills already in kindergarten, and the type of Thanksgiving program I saw. I put on a similar program in second grade.
Yeah.
It's of course then it was Indians. It was Pilgrims and Indians. It wasn't Native Americans, but it's just everything has changed, John. So it's very hard because I'm not up with the current curriculum.
Tell me, is there anything that in this last hour that we've been together, we've talked about many things, but I don't want you to walk out the door, which we probably will anyway, and remember, I should have said, I wish I had remembered. Is there anything that we've left out?
There's so many things.
Take this time to to if you can grab something from that part of your experience to share with us, because I don't know all the questions to ask.
I must say, I think many of the teachers that I started with back in the 60s, it brings back so many memories when we started to. Florence Kohler, for example, was one of my first colleagues. We used to share corners of the cafeteria together when we used to work. We had no rooms to work in, and I think some of the newer teachers might like to hear this, that we worked in terrible conditions, and that was another thing that the union helped. I worked in a shower room one time, and I connected to a gym with one or two students with the water dripping down. I'll never forget it. Florence had one corner of the cafeteria at Northeast with a screen, a portable screen, and I had another corner of the cafeteria. And we tried not to get in each other's way or talk too loud to interrupt each other, because she was teaching her reading over here. And those were back in the days when Kohler's Market was still in Brentwood. They were on the corner there. And the BTA office was there too, and across the street from them. So it's just, be glad if you have a classroom with and a place to call your own to teach in. And we had so many hardships. It's just that I'm sure I heard the other day on the radio that all 7th grade students have laptop computers in some state. I was like shocked. I mean, they were lucky if you had paper or pencils or anything. So I guess that would be the advice that I have for the teachers today. Be grateful if you have a classroom and a place to work. And just don't give up. If things get tough, don't give up, because I'm a survivor and you could be a survivor too.
Shirley, thank you so much for giving us your time and being with us.
Thank you, John.